Welcome to Real Crime Stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the rain as you dive into tonight's chilling tale. If you love true crime and horror, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Now, turn off the lights and let the story begin. When are you going to die? I was sitting in front of my computer as the strange website loaded up on my screen. It was far too late, and I should have been in bed hours ago. I peeked over at the clock, considering if it was worth even going to sleep, or if I should pull an all-nighter and just pretend I didn't need rest. But the website had captivated me. I was intrigued by the single line of text displayed in its center. "How are they going to die?" was all it said. There were a lot of questions going through my mind. How was who going to die? And what kind of weird game was it? So I clicked on the text, which brought up a single text box for me to type into. Name and birth date. I mulled the question over, thinking I should start with someone I knew had already died. My old physics professor came to mind. He'd always been a real dick, and as a lifelong chain smoker, it came as no surprise that he'd succumbed to lung cancer. Leonard Harris, 7th of August, 1961. I typed in. I sat back in my chair as the page loaded. I half expected it to just pick out people's obituaries from the internet. A few seconds later, a response was posted. Leonard Harris, lung cancer, 12th of September, 2016. I had to admit, it was kind of cool. I started searching up family members and old acquaintances I knew had passed, but whose deaths were shrouded in mystery. I started with my grandfather, who'd just one day been listed as dead. I was too young to understand, and my mother never cared to explain what had happened. Jonathan Lawrence, 29th of April, 1937. He'd died an old man, so I just presumed it was a heart attack or a stroke. I'd never seen his dead body myself, and since my mother refused to talk about it, I wanted to know. Jonathan Lawrence, suicide, 17th of October, 1999. The answer replied. I couldn't believe it. The date was correct, but the cause? Had my grandfather really killed himself? I called up my mother. She answered in her usual cheerful tone of voice, happy to hear from me. But her tone quickly changed as she heard my distressed voice. "What's wrong?" she asked. "How did Grandpa die?" I asked. "What do you mean? Why would you ask that?" she said back. "Did he kill himself?" She went silent for a moment before responding. "How did you find out?" We talked for a while after that, and my mother finally came clean about everything that had happened. She talked about my grandfather's Alzheimer's diagnosis, the depression that followed, and his eventual death at his own hands. I never told her how I found out, and she never asked a second time. Despite the uncomfortable topic, the honesty did actually bring us closer together. Once she'd hung up, I went back to the website. Though it seemed impossible, it held the secret deaths of so many people that had died in mysterious ways. I started looking up celebrities and unsolved missing person cases. Though I couldn't confirm that any of them were correct, it seemed eerily believable how it always came up with a logical and plausible solution that fit each case. Then I made the biggest mistake of my entire life, and typed in the name of someone who hadn't died yet. I don't know what even prompted the ridiculous idea. I guess I just wanted to see what the system would come up with. or if it would just let me know that the person was still alive. I put in the name of my very best, but incredibly stupid friend, Alex Branson. 2nd of June, 1993. The system loaded, and before long, an answer had been calculated. Alex Branson, broken neck, 5th of March, 2021. I sat back in my chair, confused as to what I was reading. The 5th of March was still a couple of weeks away, yet it had marked it as the death date of my best friend. I closed the website then and there, not because I believed in the prediction, but because of an uneasiness I just couldn't explain. A bizarre sense of certainty that he'd just die. I debated whether or not to tell, but in the end I thought it best not to scare him. After all, the website couldn't possibly predict the actual death of someone still living. It was just impossible, so I saved the page, thinking it might be fun to check out once Alex was safe. But on the 5th of March, 2021, Alex didn't show up to work. No one thought much of it at first. He had a tendency to oversleep, but his death prediction lingered in the back of my mind. I sent him a few messages, just asking if he was coming in to work at all. I tried to sound nonchalant, but just based on the sheer number of texts I sent out, I guess I came across as concerned. But he never responded. It wouldn't be until that afternoon, before I got a call from the hospital. Alex was dead, suffering a broken neck after drunkenly stumbling off a sidewalk as he was chatting up a couple of women. They'd called an ambulance, but then they'd just left him to die on the street. An embarrassing, but not surprising way for him to go. I couldn't even respond. I just got back in my chair and tried to process the message. The site had been right. Alex had died exactly as predicted, and I'd done nothing to prevent it. I left work early and turned my computer on just to stare at that god-forsaken site. I typed in Alex's name once again, just to confirm that I had in fact read it correctly. Then I thought about what I could do with the predictions. I could look up the names of everyone I knew, including myself. Maybe I could even prevent them from dying. But just the knowledge of our demise was too great a power. And at first I couldn't bring myself to just do it. For hours, I just sat there and stared at the empty box, trying to muster up enough bravery to look up another name. After an eternity of trepidation, I finally found an ounce of braveness. With shaky fingers, I typed in my mother's name, Lucy Hofford, 19th of October, 1975, and almost instantly I got a response. Lucy Hofford, cardiac arrest, 7th of June, 2051. I let out a sigh of relief, and started thinking of ways to get her healthy by that time. Decades away. Then I started searching up my other family members, most of which would die from age-related diseases. But then I came to my brother's name, and the message I received immediately sent me into panic. Brandon Hofford, car crash, March 10, 2021. He would be dead in just a few days. Knowing what had happened to Alex, I didn't hesitate with calling him. I begged him to just stay home for the next couple of days, telling him his life was in immediate danger. When he asked why, I just asked him to trust me. The two of us had an unspoken agreement that whenever something truly mattered, we'd both support each other even without a reason. I wanted to tell him what I'd seen, but the words kind of froze in my throat, as if I couldn't physically tell anyone what I'd discovered. That was the first time I attempted to explain the situation. But something deep within me kept me frozen in place. Then I just told him not to drive. And he obliged, as he heard it in my voice just how serious I was. Still, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't tell him the details. The laws of physics had bent to keep the site a secret. Only available to myself. On the morning of March 10th, I called him again to check that everything was going according to plan. He remained calm, and had no intention of leaving his home. He was planning to binge-watch whatever show available and order takeaway. And that was it. He was so calm about it all, to the point where I almost managed to relax myself. But as evening approached, I got another phone call. My brother had died in a car crash just as predicted. Apparently the takeout he'd ordered had traces of nuts in it, causing an anaphylactic reaction. His EpiPen had somehow been left at work, leaving him with no help. Rather than call an ambulance, he decided to take the chance and drive to get his pen. A much shorter trip. He passed out just as he reached the office, colliding with the building, killing him on impact. I couldn't save him. In the wake of my brother's death, I kept searching up names of the people I knew, hoping to save those who were up for an untimely death. Once I'd cleared the people closest to me, I started looking up strangers, quickly finding people who'd soon be murder victims, killed in accidents, so-called preventable deaths. As with Brandon, I just couldn't form the physical words that explained where I had the information. And no matter how hard I try, there's nothing I can do to prevent their deaths. What stood on the website was written in stone, unchanging and eerie. As the days passed, and the people kept dying, I was about to give up. I so desperately wanted to share the existence of the page, but I couldn't physically do it. In the end, there was only one name left to look up, my own. Though I didn't need any prophecy to know exactly what's about to happen. Michael Hofford, suicide, April 17, 2021. I can't live with this discovery, and I can't share it as fact, but maybe if I tell it through a story, someone else will seek it out. I couldn't change fate, but what if someone else could? Story. I'm a low-level US government employee. I just saw something I wasn't supposed to see. You know that meme about how presidents and governors, after getting elected, look super shell-shocked and stressed the next time they make a public appearance? Like the first thing that happens after you come into power is that you're pulled into a room and told all of the secrets of the world? Well, turns out it's true. As a matter of fact, it's a VHS tape. The 4-hour tape was always a bit of an urban legend at the office. I'll be keeping the details of my role in government very, very vague. But to be absolutely clear, I am very low level. My role is caked between layers of bureaucracy, and in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty inconsequential role. When you're working at my level, you're generally not privy to any high-level secrets. Yes, top-secret meetings did occasionally happen in our building, but my focus is pretty limited and heavily administrative. So, you do what any other department does when you're in the bottom rung of the hierarchy. You discuss rumors, rumblings, crazy conspiracy theories, and everything in between. It's water-cooler conversation for us. Man, I wonder what the folks at the top are doing right now. That kind of stuff. Out of all of the rumors that fluttered around the office, the 4-hour tape was always the one I found the most fascinating. The crux of it. Once you reach the highest clearance level, you are sat down and shown this tape. None of us knew what the contents of the tape were, or if a tape like this even actually existed. But it was fun to speculate about it every now and then. Most of the time, we found with our little rumors and conspiracy theories that the most mundane answer was usually the correct one. Life, in general, finds a way to surprise us with how boring everything can be. Now, there's something you should know about me before I continue. I'm a wimp. I'm meek, anxious, and generally restless. I'm a chronic rule follower. There is no part of me that wants to dig up secret documents and uncover the truth about what happens at the highest levels of government in our country. So when I discuss the events of 4 nights ago, please be mindful of that. I didn't ask for this, and I'm only sharing because I don't know how much time I have left anyway. And I can't live with this stuck in my conscience. Alone. It was nighttime at the office. I'm known to be a bit of a chronic workaholic, and there was something I really wanted to get done before the week was over. So I was working later than usual. I went to print a document on what I thought was the printer in my immediate vicinity. The notification on my computer showed that my document was being printed. But I didn't hear any noise or paper coming out from my local printer. I checked the name of the device I selected, and it looked like I'd accidentally clicked on a printer that was being used on another floor. I sighed. In any normal circumstances, I probably would have just forgotten about that mistake and reprinted the documents on my local printer again. But our general management here is quite stringent on us making sure that all confidential documents are accounted for. We are not allowed to share department-specific documentation to other departments. Fuck it, I thought. I looked up a map in my inbox showing the locations of all of the company printers. Turns out, I'd accidentally clicked on the printer named Prince Charming on the 7th floor. Ha, funny name. Off I went. I really should have just let it be. I got to the elevator and rode it up to the 7th floor. I emerged onto the mostly empty office area. In case you were wondering, the building I work in is huge. But I'd worked there long enough to know my way around it. So I knew the area surrounding the printer relatively well. I made my way through the hallways and eventually spotted the printer with my freshly printed papers minting it. I gave myself a mental pat on the back for continuing my lifelong streak of following the rules. As I went to grab the papers, I noticed some light buzz in a meeting room nearby. I looked through the window to see roughly 10 people hanging out around a snack table. In the room was a large old-looking TV on a cart, and rows of some of the fanciest folding chairs I'd ever seen, organized in a neat fashion. I didn't think much of it, and started walking off, until I heard the door open. Hey, Mr. Boskowitz, right? Jesus man, we were supposed to start 15 minutes ago. Get in here. What? No sorry, I think you have the wrong. I don't care why you're late. Just get in here, grab a plate of snacks and sit down. We're starting soon. Put your phone in the bag, electronic watch in the bag, and anything else on your person that can be used to record audio or video. He responded hastily. Something about his sternness and tone short-circuited my brain. For guys like me, there is a third option beyond fight or flight. It's called the just go with it until it's over, also known as the captured rabbit strategy. I put my phone and my watch in the bag. I meekly tried to butt in with another. "Sir, I'm not Mr. Boskowitz," but he had already pulled me into the room at this point. He closed the door and walked to the front by the TV. I thought about making a break for it, but I decided to just see it through at this point, hoping deep down that whatever was happening was as inconsequential as my job was. Everyone had their snack plates and were heading to their seats. I awkwardly grabbed a muffin from the snack table, put it on a napkin, and took a seat in the very back row. Everyone was spaced out from each other. It didn't seem like any of these folks knew one another. I quietly sighed at the thought of having to sit through some sort of boring informational seminar or irrelevant training session. After a few minutes of everyone settling in, the man who originally brought me into the room started talking. There was an equally serious guy standing next to him, and a Secret Service-looking fella standing in the corner. I started wondering to myself why we were going to watch a video off of a very old school-looking TV. Felt like we were all back in elementary school or something. All right, I just need to do a final run through before we get started. The man at the front said, "I know you all read through the emails and signed your releases. I just wanted to recap some ground rules. You're allowed to get up and grab another snack. But beyond that, we want you to pay full attention to the tape once it starts playing. If any of you need to go to the bathroom, we strongly urge you to wait until the presentation is over. If you absolutely have to go, we will pause the tape and one of us will escort you. There is water in the corner by the snacks. Cups are right there as well. And goes without saying, but any discussion of this presentation to folks who do not have top compartmented clearance is a breach of your terms of employment. A breach of your non-disclosure agreement. A breach of your multiple signed releases. A breach of the U.S. Criminal Code in the state of redacted, and a breach of the conditions laid out by the Committee for the Protection and Preservation of Human Consciousness." They started dimming the lights. Fuck, it felt like I had missed any window of opportunity. I had to leave. Too late. That committee name he highlighted sounded way above my clearance level. One of the men at the front of the room pulled out a VHS tape from a bag, and very slowly and securely put it into a VHS player. He pressed play. I took a deep breath. Those water cooler conversations I'd had with my coworkers were starting to float to the top of my mind. But I quelled them. There was probably no need for panic. It was just a stupid government meeting. Right? The tape started. The beginning was familiar enough. Various disclaimers about this being incredibly confidential material. Yada yada yada. Insignias of relevant organizations, presidential libraries, etc. I'd seen lots of videos like this already. But wait, that insignia looked strange, like something was off. I scanned it. Presidential libraries. That same eagle. Those same stars. Weird. This time, there was a navy blue hand on the left shoulder of the eagle. Did they update the logo? Before I had time to ruminate on it too much, the tape cut to a logo I had actually never seen before. Committee for the Protection and Preservation of Human Consciousness. The logo was just an image of planet Earth. Fair enough. The video cut to a room that looked similar to the Congress floor, but with some strange differences. Seats were much more spaced out. The podium looked like it had seen better days, and the whole room looked to be on a pretty steep incline. Everything was in black and white. It looked like there were about 50 people in attendance. It was hard to make out the faces. Everything looked very dated, like the video was from the 40s or the 50s. The tape lingered on this one shot for quite a while. Minutes passed. I noticed what looked to be a choir, all in outfit and perfectly huddled next to each other, standing in one of the corners of the room. It really felt like I shouldn't have been seeing this. None of this was meant for my eyes. After a few more minutes, the tape abruptly cut to an awkward angle video of a man speaking at the podium in the room. It was too zoomed in, enough that you couldn't see his eyes or his hair. It didn't look all that professional. I couldn't tell who he was. He spoke. Members of the Committee for the Protection and Preservation of Human Consciousness. I thank you all for coming tonight. We are lucky to be in the good graces of our visitors today. Without rehashing our painful history, the tape cut to a camera slowly panning over all of the faces of the folks seated in the room. The attendees looked pained, somber. The man continued his speech as the camera continued panning over the committee. We can acknowledge that the journey to this moment has been an arduous one. I am pleased to say that humanity, faced with a dire ultimatum, has come to a majority decision. To our esteemed guests from across the solar system, we are thankful for the opportunity you have given us to negotiate with you. I felt adrenaline. Fuck, we had made contact with extraterrestrial life. This was the truth. Maybe, like the saying went, the truth would set me free. Before I outline the decision taken by humanity, I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank the brilliant representatives from all of the nations of the world who came together to ensure that this decision was taken with utmost responsibility, care, and appreciation for our human species. I am aware that this was not a unanimous decision. Shit, what did that mean? I felt the sweat on my brow. I felt nausea coming in. I awkwardly and slowly took a bite of the muffin. The tape returned to a now corrected angle of the speaker at the podium. His eyes were visible. They looked strained, like they'd seen multiple versions of hell. To the nations who still disagree, he continued, I thank you nonetheless for accepting the majority decision. May this moment, which will be held in secrecy throughout the rest of time, be appreciated as a critical milestone for human civilization. Tonight is not a victory. It is a somber moment. However, we were faced with two options: extinction or accepting the agreement. We made our choice, and I believe time will show that this was the right decision. What was this? I hereby announce that we accept the agreement provided by our special guests who have chosen to go by the name Redacted. The intergalactic species known as Redacted will allow humanity on planet Earth to continue to populate, grow, and innovate. In return, all governments of the world will honor the promise. He needed to spit it out. What the fuck was this agreement? We will not be covering every element of the agreement in this session. I will, however, highlight the main points. At this point, the video showed the man at the podium looking down. He was reading off of something. For the first time, he looked nervous, scared. I saw some humanity in him. We honor the agreement that Redacted hold the right to visit planet Earth on a recurring basis. They will be allowed to consume, for the basis of nourishment, a majority of the human population on planet Earth. After every visit, the remaining humans on Earth will be expected to breed and grow to capacity in time for the next visit. We acknowledge that we will maintain a parallel history which will be shared with our world's population, to ensure that humanity stays motivated to continue existing as a species. This parallel history may suggest that mass extinction events are the results of man-made folly, as opposed to the work of external forces. For the first time, my fight or flight response was actually flight. I wanted to escape, but I didn't know what I'd even be running from. The last visit by Redacted was approximately in the year 1346, and it lasted 7 years. We will continue to honor our parallel history about this event. I just wanted it to end. The next visit, which will not be met with resistance, will be in the year 2028 and will run for 1 full calendar year on Earth, marking a 675-year gap between the last significant visit by the species known as Redacted. This visiting cadence is expected to speed up over time, as the remaining humans continue to sharpen their focus on building technology to allow humanity to reproduce in a speedy and productive manner. Jesus Christ, our planet is a fucking farm. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The tape cut away to a larger view of the Congress-like room, the somber committee members in attendance, and the members of the choir in the corner, who I could only imagine looked horrified. Where were the visitors? Why couldn't I see them? The camera then panned to a number of larger, empty seats, the same slow style of video panning as the one that happened earlier with the committee members. No visible entities in the seats, but the seats themselves looked blurry. The man at the podium carried on with his speech. As the camera pan on those blurry seats continued, we should acknowledge the privilege of knowing that there is indeed life in the cosmos. That extraterrestrial life has chosen to visit our planet, and that the cycle and balance provided by nature extends beyond the confines of planet Earth. Much like humanity has found its place on Earth in the food chain, we acknowledge our place in the divine order of things when encountered with beings of greater power, understanding, cognitive function, and evolutionary progression. Fucking hell, I shouldn't have stayed late at work. I should have made my identity clear from the very beginning. I knew that I wasn't supposed to see this. And while, it really looked like the speaker was about to cry. While the process of consumption is a painful and lengthy one, we respect the trade-off that comes with the preservation of our species. We also acknowledge, as part of the promise, that substitutes for human life in the form of clones, should we discover that technology in the future, or other living species, will never function as viable alternatives for nourishment. The speaker continued, I didn't need to know this. This whole thing was way too specific for me. Our final major acknowledgement, as part of this agreement, is that we accept Redacted as the Great Almighty, as the entities we will now refer to as God. God, as an interstellar species, has revealed itself to us, and thus, the continued existence of Redacted is now the true priority of the people of our planet. We are blessed to play a part in the continuation of God. In God we trust. Amen. The tape then cut to footage of the choir. As the speaker continued, we bless our visitors with this gift. A performance of the national anthems of all major nations of the world will now commence. Audio of a very loud backing track of the Star-Spangled Banner started playing from the video as my stomach sank. The tape showed footage of the choir singing on top of the track. Not sure if it was because they were scared for their lives, but I could really tell they were singing their hearts out. As they sang, the camera continued to pan over the blurry seats. They finished singing the anthem. And suddenly, fast forwarding, fucking hell, I had forgotten I was sitting in a room. I had disengaged from the video for a brief moment. I had mentally returned to the present day. This was our world. This was our fucking lives. The men at the front continued fast forwarding through the tape. It looked like they were skipping through performances of the other national anthems. The fast forwarding went on for a while. Every small while, it looked like a new choir group was entering the Congress-like room to sing a different national anthem. On and on the tape went. I had to fight the urge to pass out. One of the men at the front of our room, standing next to the TV, started speaking up. "We are legally obligated to get to the end of this tape. But you don't need to look at the rest of it. Please feel free to look down. Or close your eyes. Or grab a snack," he said. I noticed the others seated in the room were taking that advice. Most of them decided to look straight down. For some weird reason, I couldn't look away. The fast forwarding progressed. On the tape, it was yet another choir group joining to perform an anthem. And then another. And then another. It looked like we were near the end. The fast forwarding now showed a conversation between the man at the podium and another man who was whispering in his ear. The man at the podium was vehemently shaking his head. The other man continued whispering. This continued on. Eventually, there was a quick moment of the man at the podium begrudgingly nodding. The last few fast-forwarded moments of the tape remain burned in my memory to this very moment. They were pandemonium. The attendees were sitting in their chairs, frozen, shivering, crying. The people in the various choirs were running around the rooms in fast motion. As blurry spots started covering them and ungodly things started happening to them. Fuck. Why didn't I look away? If ever there was a fucking time to follow orders. It felt like the whole thing went on for longer than it should have. Finally, the men at the front of our room stopped the fast forwarding. They pressed play on the tape to cover the very final moment. In the tape, the man at the podium, clearly emotional, spoke his final line. "The agreement has been ratified by redacted. Thank you all for attending." The final shot of the video is the full room. The committee members in their seats, shivering and crying. The dismantled and bloodied choir members strewn about the room. The blurry seats with blood smeared on them. The video then cut away. Back to that same insignia on a black backdrop. The presidential libraries. That eagle. Those stars. The navy blue hand on the wing of the eagle. The lights in our room turned on. The rest of the night was a blur. The men at the front of the room told us it was best for us to sit for an hour to digest the information. No discussion about the video was allowed to take place. When we were ready to stand, we were allowed to leave and go home. They gave us some pointers on how to accept the information over the coming weeks. Things like taking long walks, exercising, watching a sitcom, etc. I wasn't worried about them realizing that I wasn't supposed to be there. If anything, I felt a strange camaraderie with everyone in the room. We were all, truly, in the same boat. As soon as I left the building and got in my car, I just drove, for as long as I could. I would stop for gas. Then I'd keep driving. I'd stop again. Then I'd keep driving. Again. And again. I'm holed up in a hotel now. I'm just glad I could get this off my chest. The funny thing is, all I can think about is the length of that stupid tape. While I can't confirm, I feel like if it were played straight through without fast forwarding, it would have only been 3 hours. I wonder if the 4-hour tape rumor came from the fact that we all needed that extra hour to digest the information. And now, you're probably wondering, why don't I name the species that is going to spell humanity's doom throughout the rest of time? Why am I calling them redacted? Well, as the self-appointed leader of the Committee for the Acknowledgement that we should have just chosen extinction, I don't feel the need to honor our captors by calling them by their name. If I don't see you again, Reddit, I appreciate the water cooler conversation. Story. I've been squatting in a condemned high-rise. These are the rules I follow to stay safe. I'm not homeless. I have a home. I just don't own it. But it's mine and I work to keep it. Every city has its fair share of abandoned buildings to squat in. But usually you gotta deal with either cops or shitty neighbors. The Andale high-rise has neither. Police stay away. So do the locals. As a stranger from out of town, I stumbled across the place on my first night in the city and thought it a little strange that a 28-story tower block had been left to rot. Every window black, every light in the courtyard smashed. No cars in the lot. No booth for a guard. Not even barbed wire on the fence. Barely half a mile from a playground filled with shouting drunken teenagers, but none of them strayed in the direction of Andale. No fires or music or bottles hurtling through the air. It was silent. Inside, I found that the lobby had been torn to shit. Double doors ripped open and left that way for what looked like years. Easy access for the curious. But I was the only one there. Most of the first story had collapsed. Waterlogged ceiling tiles turned to mulch by shitty British weather. I know water is invasive, but it had practically fucking colonized the place so bad algae was growing up the walls. Even the elevator shaft was flooded. My own reflection looking back at me as I peered through brackish water and caught a glimpse of the old rusted carriage just a few feet below. I couldn't help but think about standing on top of it, waist high, and reaching down to pull open the emergency hatch. Only natural to wonder what was down there. Little metal box soaking in pitch black water for years and years. I thought about pressing the button, calling it up and seeing the elevator rise in spite of all logic. An image I still think of from time to time. Meanwhile, the empty shaft loomed above, cables whistling in the wind. I've learned not to linger by it. If you look up, you'll sometimes see something ducking out of the way, pulling its head through the doors before you get a good look. It finds it awfully funny, even tries to make a game out of it. Like peekaboo. Play too much though and it starts to pop up elsewhere. Any open door becomes an invitation. Sent more than a few people running for their lives in the middle of the night. But bad news for them. That thing is more than free to leave this place if it's part of a game. If you ask about Andale, most people just shrug or laugh. Kids'll talk about it same way they talk about any haunted house. Difference is no one dares anyone to go up there. No one uses it to get pissed or high. No one sneaks into the basement to have a risky little fuck. No one hides their stashes there. It has all the hallmarks of your classic urban legend. Only people actually stay away. They'll laugh and joke and tell scary stories. but they treat the soil it's on like it houses a radioactive leak. And the council, I'm surprised they haven't knocked it down, but they, out of everyone in the city, have the most to lose by talking about it. They built it in the mid-50s as government housing. Only a lot of the young mothers who moved in there found their children's health taking a turn for the worse. Started with newborns, babies that wouldn't wake after a peaceful night's sleep. The kinda deaths that got written off as either negligence or abuse. Screaming teenage girls hauled off to prison on the words of doctors who didn't give a shit. It's always the mother's fault in some people's eyes. And these girls had no one to stand up for them. 2 in the first year, 4 in the next, and they kept on coming for every year until it closed. Wasn't until 1982 that someone traced the source of deaths to tainted water storage on the roof. Toxic metals leaching into the supply. Not enough to kill an adult, but bad news for anyone with weak immune systems. 38 women had been imprisoned by then. Another 23 had killed themselves before they could be sentenced. And those are just the ones accounted for. Not all the deaths were from the water. Andale has a way of being bad for any child's health. No matter the circumstance. More than a few toddlers starved to death as their parents rotted in the tub from an overdose. Even more were lost when they found their parents' stash. Little bodies racked with agonizing fits as their panicked mothers screamed for help. One tripped down the elevator shaft because the doors opened as if the carriage was right there. And those are the ones who were found. Plenty more went missing, written off as runaways. In the end, Andale's reputation as a cursed place got so bad the only way out was to shut the whole thing down. Board it up, erase it from the records. Pretend it never happened and just forget. But Andale kept on killing even after the doors were officially shut. If anything, it only got nastier. Talked to one cop who told me he found a guy dead from sepsis on the 6th floor couple years after the place was shut down. No one could fucking believe it. They reckon this guy scratched himself on a nail and caught gangrene like it was the 1800s. Never went to the hospital. Just laid there and died slowly and painfully as the infection spread. But not before he took every last bit of furniture in the room and shoved it against the door. Strange enough on its own. But it was the flag he'd made out of his own clothes that freaked everyone out. He'd scrawled help on it, like he wanted to get someone's attention down below even though the lock was on his side. He could have left any time he wanted. Cop I spoke to said he was there when they kicked the door down. Still remembers the look in dead man's eyes. He was glaring at the door 2 days after he'd passed. White-knuckled fists gripping a blanket that smelled sickly sweet from all that infection. There were others too. Lots of people falling. Many of them without a good reason. Got so bad they bricked the roof door, but by the time I arrived someone had cleared it all away with a sledgehammer. I still don't hang out up there. Not after I first went up and saw pale fingers gripping the ledge. Like someone was hanging off it and holding on for dear life. I reckon a lot of people see something like that and think a person needs their help. They go rushing over to offer a hand. But when I saw it, something about those grimy nails set alarm bells off in my head. Fingers looked all wrong, so I took my coat off and used a broom handle to move it closer to the ledge. Sure enough, those ugly hands snatched at the coat and ripped it out of my hands, sending it hurtling to the parking lot below. I've thought about taking a closer look from time to time, But I got a thing about heights and could never bring myself to investigate it much further. You'd think I'd leave, but it's my home. I own it as much as it owns me. People even refer to me as the caretaker now, like they forgot I wasn't always here. Police treat me the same. Can you believe that? Any reports of a break-in and they call me on my number to go take a look. Like I'm some sort of official. Only other guy who was here as long as me was the philosopher. I don't know his name. Just call him that because of the books he left behind. He came here back when the block was still just a place to live, and he stuck around for a few years after its closure. Lots of notebooks in his flat. Thousands of pages talking about child sacrifice made to gods who don't like being named. Along with pictures of strange things frozen in ice and medical photos that look fake. At first I thought he came to document the curse. He has dozens of books just recording all the strange things he saw. Like birds with too many wings or milk that turn to clotted blood in the bottle. But after going through everything he owned, I found letters to a wife who'd died in childbirth. He kept her death certificate way at the back of an old-looking box filled with the letters he'd kept writing her long after the date. Another box, just a row over, had the letters she'd written back. Awful things scrawled on random scraps. Shit and blood for ink. He dated them himself and sometimes wrote notes about how they came to him. Delivered by a rat that was cannibalized in front of me. Pulled by my dentist from a cavity in my mouth. Written in the web of a spider with 13 legs. Anyway, he gives away the real reason he moved to Andale in one of the letters. Says that Andale was the key to helping her. That he was weeks away from figuring out how to open the door. Told his wife he'd bring her back. Told her he knew how. I've never figured out where he went next or what happened to him. But his apartment was locked when I found it, and likely would have stayed that way if the key hadn't turned up in my inside pocket on the first morning. Now I live in his old place. It's safe in there. He's written things on the wall that keep everything well behaved. Symbols that I don't understand but which are easy to trace, so that's what I do. I go over them every couple of months, and so far they've kept me safe and sane. Because you do need protection in Andale. I don't know when in its history the curse went from something mundane to something very real and very dark. It wasn't all just bad luck or poverty. Not by the end, and certainly not anymore. You can't just go strolling around Andale. Certainly not at night. It's dangerous. For one thing, it attracts a constant rotation of the deeply unwell who are likely to attack on sight. If you're lucky, they usually turn up dead in the halls come morning. Although sometimes it's just bits of them that I come across. Strips of skin floating on the brackish water that floods the basement stairwell. Or bloodied fingernails embedded in the ceiling plaster. Weirdest one was a single tooth in a light bulb. Bloody gum still attached to the root. The glass all around it somehow intact. Many of them come here with business. Something a little like the philosophers. Rituals. Bargains. Things like that. It's not a good idea to interrupt them. Or to give them even the slightest hint you might be a problem. Every night I lock my door and wait for Andale's business to finish, and come morning I do a sweep. Floor by floor. And clean up whatever's left of the tower block's strange pilgrims. Most of the rituals don't look real to me. In fact, I reckon a lot of people who come here just end up as victims of something or someone else. There are a lot of reasons to stay out of Andale at night. and most of its visitors strike me as a little naive. Most of what I see looks like it got stolen from a bad death metal album. I once found a book called Satanism and Witchcraft in the 21st Century. It's hard to imagine that the secret inner workings of the universe can be found in something with an ISBN number and 3,000 Amazon reviews. Of course, not all attempts at exploiting Andale's energy are so hackneyed. I had one guy turn up at my door and pay me $3,000 in cash just to show him the darkest corner in the building. I wasn't sure what he meant at first. Thought he meant light and shadow. Sort of, he replied when I explained this to him. Darkness like that can be part of it. But I'm looking for a corner. Has to be a right angle or more acute. Ideally, more acute. You understand that term, right? He'd seemed arrogant, and that last sentence confirmed as much. Good-looking guy in his late 20s. Nice suit. Looked like the stereotypical banker. Acted like one too. Plenty of places like that. I said, lots of funny rooms in Andale. People trying to make the most of limited space. Sometimes the walls meet at tight angles. Sure, but I don't know what you mean about dark. There's the basement. It's flooded. Can't think of anywhere darker than that. He bit his lip and hesitated for a second or two, as if he was actually contemplating it. Not a bad suggestion, actually. But no, too difficult to reach. And I don't just mean dark as in the absence of light. I mean dark like under the bed. Dark like that one chip in a wall that leads to a hollow space between the bricks, and as a child you can't help but wonder what lives there. Somewhere that just inexplicably feels like it's not got as much of God's attention on it as everywhere else. I thought about this for a second. His words were vague, but damn if I didn't know what he meant. A corner? I asked. Has to be an acute corner? He nodded. I think I know the place, I said, and he smiled like real creep. I took him to a flat on the 8th floor. It was rundown like everywhere else, but there was still enough of its old furniture lying around. You can pull open random drawers in there and still see the cutlery people once used. There's even an old analog TV on an old stand. You can perch on what's left of the sofa and stare at that TV and get the feeling you knew the people who lived there once. Run your thumb over the dials on the toaster, the handle of the fridge, or the yellowing plastic of a light switch, and feel an aching loss that creeps up on you out of nowhere. Look up and you'll see that the light fixture has been torn out of the ceiling. Like someone had tried swinging from it. Not a big place, by the way. 3 rooms. A bedroom with a double bed all rumpled up. A living room/kitchen. And a tiny little spare room that looked like it once would have been used for storage. Or a washing machine, maybe, if you were single and childless. A slither of space. A triangle carved out of whatever room was left over when other more important walls had been put up. That sofa I mentioned. The TV. They were all placed so whoever was sat down could always keep an eye on that room and its contents. You see, they'd put a cot inside and it's still there. Bluebottle flies circling overhead. You can't see inside the cot. Not unless you went in and actually pulled the blankets out, but it's been decades and no one has managed it yet. It's dark behind those old blankets. A heavy shadow that dissuades a closer look. Like there's something in there no one needs to see, and it's spent a long time sat there eating what little light there was. Even with a window in that room, daylight doesn't really filter down. Perfect, the businessman said when he saw it. He gazed around the flat, one detail at a time, his head pausing for a moment and a smile creeping across his face as he laid his eyes on the broken light fixture. And the cot, the sight of it, the flies that still circled above faded Winnie the Pooh blankets. It made the breath catch in his throat. "Oh, yes, this is good," he told me, dark like under the bed. "You've earned that money. I could have had a dozen men sweep this place and they wouldn't have understood the brief as well as you have." "Thank you," I replied, even if that wasn't really how I felt. Quietly, the man sat down and began to unpack his leather satchel. No pentagrams to be found, although he did unpack 7 strange-looking candles. He caught me looking at them and smiled. "Homemade," he said, "each one shaped by my hands. I'm not a good artist, but it's the effort that counts. Took forever to rend the wax. Of course, that was the easy part. The hard part was getting the fat to make it. Did you know there can be a surprisingly high level of security around a hospital's medical waste department?" "I didn't," I replied as he took out some flimsy bits of wood and a few small nails. He oh so carefully began to nail the splinters of wood together into what looked like random shapes. "Oh well," he sighed after a few quiet moments, his fingers nimbly gripping the tiny hammer as he tapped away. Already he'd put together at least 6 of the strange little wooden polygons. And with each new one I felt a strange sensation. "Would you like to stay and watch?" he asked. "Absolutely not," I answered. He stopped tapping and smiled once more. "Oh, you're clever," he said. "That's the correct answer, by the way. And if I'm to respect it, I should inform you that now is the safest time to leave." I made my way to the exit just as he lit the first candles. But not before I looked towards the cot one last time. I was surprised to see a hollow blackness that extended beyond the doorway. Like a curtain had been draped across it. Only there was depth to it that drew the eye. The businessman paid it no attention. But after a few more seconds he eventually looked up at me expectantly. "Can I ask what is it you want?" I said. "Everyone who comes here, I don't get the sense it ever works out for them. I'm looking for a new kind of afterlife." He replied. "Do you need one? We all need one," he said with a wry chuckle. "But only those of us willing to take a few risks will get a better deal. Everyone else," he grimaced, "it's worth the bother. But look who I'm speaking to." He looked to the darkness that enveloped the doorway. Shapes could be seen floating past. "You should leave now," he said. I pulled the door shut and, noticing that the sun was rapidly setting, ran to my apartment where I knew the walls would keep me safe. When I returned the next day, the man's satchel was still where I'd last seen it, propped against one arm of the sofa. The candles had burned down to the very end of the wicks and left a lingering smell that's still there all these years later. And of the man himself, well, in the room with the cot, which still has bluebottle flies orbiting overhead, there is now a shadow burned into the wall. It's blurry and diffused, but vaguely recognizable as a man on his knees, his head pressed to the floor in a gesture of supplication. I've known it to occasionally move, to turn its head and look towards me, at which my temples throb. My ears pop and a darkness begins to encroach upon the edges of my vision. I never exactly considered that flat to be Disneyland before, but now I avoid it like the plague. Still, it could be worse. Not every ritual ends so cleanly, and at times I've had to personally intervene. Something I hate bitterly. If people want to go poking around in the universe's undercarriage, that's their business. It's one thing if I've got to sweep what's left of them up afterwards, but at least that's a one-and-done job. Sometimes it isn't so clean. One guy turned up and told me he'd be a new resident, my neighbor, and we'd get to know each other. A bumbling old man with an upper-class accent and the look of a professor who was down on his luck. He set up in the room next to mine, and no matter how little I spoke to him, he never really got the hint and kept trying to act like a good friend. Few times I did initiate conversation, it was to tell him the place he'd chosen didn't have much in the way of protection. He pointed to some funny little rashes and told me they were his protection. Over the next few weeks I'd bump into him from time to time, always on his hands and knees, scraping some dank corner or moldy pile of bumpy growths. He collected fungi, told me on the first day, and I'd often see him wiping his samples onto petri dishes that he whispered quiet words to whenever he thought I wasn't around. I don't think he was sane, but he probably wasn't completely barmy because he lived long enough to get a sense of Andale and only come out in the day. Meanwhile, his apartment filled up with a growing collection of chittering terrariums and pickle jars, their specimens hidden by murky fluids. All over, he planted and cultivated strange mushrooms and molds, encouraged them to soak up the darkness of Andale and set them to grow in the rife conditions he'd cultivated. Towards the end, his living room had mushrooms growing out the walls, plaster crumbling beneath microbial armies until there was only concrete and rebar. And even then mold continued to grow and thrive. A few times I peered in and found him feeding meat to the frilly growths that exploded out of the old furniture. During this time the symbols on our shared wall would often grow hot, and I found myself having to replace them on a nearly daily basis as he tinkered away on the other side. I asked him once or twice to tone it down. "This is important work," he growled, an unseen darkness creeping into his voice. "I'm not some ditzy crackhead trying to summon the Baphomet. I'm not looking to get high. This is science, progress. That is what I am working towards." "Yeah, well, your progress is trying to eat its way into my flat. Can you ask it to stop?" He stopped, froze in mid-gesture like I'd said something either profoundly stupid or insightful, or likely a bit of both. He looked at the rashes on his arms that had, by now, started to sprout some of their own strange fruit. When he finally spoke again, it was sly, like a lecherous old man propositioning a nurse. "This fungi," he said, "they had samples of it in the university for 30 years. Can you imagine? They never even realized what they had until I found it and unlocked its potential. Now I've finally found the source and I can do things no one else thought possible. This entire time my thesis has depended upon the idea that the fungus has a capacity for information processing way beyond anything we've considered before. And your idea is a good one. You know, asking it just might be an option." He scuttled off without another word, and for the next few days he set about the building like a furious little honeybee in spring, poking and prodding, setting trap after trap and cleaning them vigorously of any rats or mice he caught. When I did my morning sweeps, I'd find him hovering over Andale's latest victims, scraping what was left of them into transparent bags for his own purposes. "Don't mind me," he'd mutter. "It's worthless to you, but these poor souls could help me achieve great things." This persisted for another month. He no longer scraped mold or mushrooms off old apartments. He became interested only in meat. And by the time it came to an end, I can say confidently that I have never smelled anything worse than the prickly, musty odor that wafted out from under his locked door. It became so bad that I began to wonder if I might have to ask for police help and have him removed when. Finally, he simply disappeared from Andale's halls. One morning he was there, annoyingly shooing me out of the way as he lowered jars into the flooded basement. And then the next he was gone and Andale's halls were silent once more. But that didn't mean he had moved out. Far from it. Actually, it took 2 days before I decided to just go ahead and break his door down. I kicked at it with a short, sharp blow only to find my leg immediately disappeared through wood that had the texture of sodden cardboard. I freed my foot and tried a different tactic, grabbing the handle and pulling so hard that it simply popped right out of the rancid wooden frame. Free to move, the door swung open with an eerie creak and fetid air, hot and damp, blew out of the room. Inside I found that the man's specimens had gone wild. Terrariums had shattered, their contents spilling outwards. Frogs as large as footballs glared at me from behind furry fronds. And insects with human eyes scuttled away before the amphibians could snatch them up. In one corner, rats had built a hive out of old cardboard, their backs covered with fungal growths that resembled human fingers and other appendages. In another corner, something that looked a little like a black rubber sheet slapped furiously at passing vermin, and it took me a few seconds to realize it was a slime mold. When it finally caught something, it dragged the strange creature squealing into the dark corner where it grew and constricted around its meal like a fist. I stared at it horrified until one by one black orbs unveiled itself from within the strange mass, and I realized it had eyes to stare right back at me. It was a cacophony of god-awful terror, so gripping that it kept me from hearing the muffled noise of a human struggling to speak. Eventually it did reach my ears, and I used my torch to light up the far wall without having to actually step inside. I found the scientist half grown into the wall. Algae and moss coated him head to toe so that he was no longer recognizable. But I had to assume it could be no one else. Wide eyes glared at me with terror and pain as nasty little critters nibbled away at what was left of his shins. Meanwhile, strange tendrils probed at his ears and head, never resting for a moment. He kept trying to speak, but the algal growths kept driving their way into his mouth until, one by one, they pushed too far and something snapped. His eyes went wider still. His squeals became hysterical, and his jaw slowly slid further down his chest until it hit the floor with a sodden thump. Finally made contact? I asked. An awful idea if I've heard one. What would a mushroom have to say even in the best of circumstances? Let alone one that was grown in the ruins of Andale? I can only assume you never got around to telling it to stay off my wall. Did you? No, you probably had your own reason for doing all of this, and that's what took priority. That made me wonder what it was he'd asked for. As the thought entered my head, I took a quick look around and tried to see if anything particular stood out to me. Something was growing on the sofa that looked strangely human-shaped. It might have been just my imagination, but in the dark it seemed to turn towards me. Meanwhile, the scientist continued to shiver in agony, his eyes focused on me and begging for help. "I'll see what I can do," I said before slamming the door. Something about that strange pile on the sofa had deeply unsettled me. I put the word out, asked for a gun, but got a crossbow instead a few days later. A nervous-looking 16-year-old boy ferried it to my door. I was surprised he'd entered the building. But who knows who'd ordered him to do so. I've acquired a strange sort of respect amongst the locals, and it comes in handy. This boy looked like he would have stamped on my head and robbed me blind any other day. But when he spoke to me, he did so with more respect than I ever imagined I deserved. I thanked him, took the crossbow, spent an afternoon practicing with it, and then used it to kill the scientist the next morning. Took a few hits, but in the end one thumped into his forehead and shut down his whimpered moans. I didn't see anything on the sofa this time. At least not anything human-shaped, which I was thankful for. After that it was a simple case of calling the police and beginning a long chain of events that ended with half a dozen men in hazmat suits spraying the room with noxious chemicals. For a while there I'd been worried that they'd find a corpse and ask questions. But by the time anyone actually entered the room, there was nothing left of the scientist save a splotch on the floor. I never did figure out exactly what it was he was after. Although it is not uncommon for my morning sweep to turn up a body, or part of, covered in fungal growths. And I have been known to occasionally catch glimpses of a strange person lowering themselves into the floodwater of the elevator shaft. Of course, I might just be making connections that aren't really there. All sorts of things live in that water. The entire level is flooded, and if something was down there, it'd have free reign over quite a large space. It's a strange world down there. I should know on account of one visitor who gave me a very bad time. I'll call him the fisherman since he came to Andale because of the flooded basement. Saw a photo that's been circulating around for a while now. If you know where to look. God knows who took it and how. But it shows the flooded stairwell leading to the basement, and beneath the brackish surface is a hand that's all out of proportion. Fingers splayed with perfect symmetry like a starfish. It is reaching up out of the depths and resting gently on the third step below the water. When I first met him, he was sitting happily with his feet over the edge of the flooded shaft. Water up to his knees, with a rod and line set up beside him. It was quite a surprise at first, seeing him there with a little fly fishing hat. A chubby but healthy-looking man in his 40s with an egg mayo sandwich in one hand and a phone playing Candy Crush in the other. I called out to him as I approached because, in my experience, startling someone in Andale is bad for your health no matter how sane the visitor appears. He looked up when I caught his attention and smiled amiably. "Hello." He waved with his sandwich. "You're the caretaker?" "Yes, I am," I answered. "And you are?" "Just a tourist." He smiled. "Care to join me?" The sun had risen only moments ago. "You weren't here when it was dark, were you?" I asked, more than a little suspicious. "Oh no, you've only just caught me. Been here barely 10 minutes before you showed up. I was told you'd be willing to help in exchange for a small fee." "What sort of help?" I asked. "Oh, just give me a nudge if any of the lines start moving," he said while pointing to a rod he'd set up beside the basement stairs. The door was propped open and the line led down into the darkness below. Water gently lapping just out of sight. Another line had been set up in a corner of the lobby where the floor had been torn away, revealing a hole straight down into the basement. I can't keep an eye on them all at once. You see, I have bells ready, but, well, 2 heads are better than 1. What is it exactly you're hoping to catch down there? I asked. Are you familiar with the primordial ocean? He said. The abyssal waters that God split into light and dark. All that? It's not a physical location, per se, but it does connect to certain bodies of water depending on the time and place. Last recorded manifestation was in a glass of old whiskey underneath a forgotten bar in Mexico City. Some poor fellow knocked it over and didn't notice until the following day when half the bar was suddenly underwater. Quickly rectified, but some of the things swimming in that water were something else. And all from at the bottom of a glass no wider than my wrist. Imagine what we can do with this, he said while gesturing at water by his feet. You think there could be fish alive down there? I asked. At least, he replied. I'd be willing to pay for any reliable information, of course. Do you have any idea what might be down there? Not really, I shrugged, but I'd guess it wants to be left alone. You might be right there, he said while looking at his other rods. I didn't exactly put down any old lure. You know? He reached into his pocket and took out a strange tuft of fur and ivory. Holding it up for me to squint at. A tooth from a man who drowned in the sea. A drone collected it off a shipwreck near the Norwegian coast. The fur is actually red algae that was found growing on his bones. I have plenty of these and, well, other things that might appeal to what's on the other side. My research was thorough and expensive. Come on, take a seat. Flat fee, 1,000. Just sit here until the sun starts to set. I just have to sit? I asked. And let me know if you hear or see anything. I groaned and sat beside him, folding my legs instead of letting them dangle in the water below. Despite my reticence, we stayed like that for several hours. He'd brought lots of food, good homemade stuff, along with plenty of cold beer. We sat there and spoke very little, but we did eat and drink a tremendous amount. Not the kind of thing I do normally, but I was being paid to be there, and I didn't really have anywhere else to be. It was, all in told, a very pleasant afternoon, until I fell asleep. When I awoke, it was with a terrible gasp. My chest was tight like something had been sitting on it, and judging from the terrible giggling and scampering feet I heard running off into the darkness. It might not have been just a feeling. Already panic was setting in as my eyes darted to the open doors and saw that the moon was out and had been for hours. I fumbled for my torch and turning it on saw that there was no sign of the fisherman. All his stuff had been left behind, yet all that remained of him was his hat that still floated on the water. Even as I watched, a smooth, glistening shape curled beneath the water and plucked it off the surface. I recoiled and crawled away from it as fast as I could. This was bad. I knew deep in my heart I'd never been as at risk I was in that moment. The open doors that led outside were tempting, but just beside them were the stairs that led downwards, and I swore I could hear something approaching. I couldn't help but picture the fungal man I'd seen in the scientist's flat. Then again, that basement was huge, and who knows what lay down there. I decided to go for the stairs. The entire time my heart was in my chest. I had never been caught outside my room at night. Not since my first night when I'd slept in the lobby with my coat pulled over me. You don't get lucky twice. Not with Andale. So I knew had to be careful. I had to be quiet. My only hope was to go unnoticed. I took to stealth, climbing each floor in perfect silence, hiding in well-known spots at the slightest hint of footsteps, human or otherwise, Andale comes alive at night. Whispered mutterings from strange children who descend from air vents, living there for God knows how long. Other times I saw apparitions, including one, a toddler, the sight of whom made my stomach growl with an insatiable hunger that hurt just to contemplate. She stared at me with pleading eyes as I slunk away from her open door. I might have been tempted to help her were it not for the sight of the moon peering through her translucent image. And yet, despite all this, I somehow made it to the 14th floor alive. Only it was there right at the final hurdle, so close to safety, that I came across something out of my worst nightmare. A woman stood outside my apartment door. Silent, pale, dirt-covered fingernails. It was all too often I'd open my door and find muddy impressions on the floor made by a woman's bare feet. Now I knew who left them every night. I couldn't see her face from where I hid, but something about her seemed profoundly familiar. When she finally turned towards me, I remembered. I recognized her, even though most of her face was missing. It was the philosopher's wife. He had succeeded, it seemed, but I couldn't imagine at what god-awful price. Because the woman who stared at me had clearly weathered some years in the grave. It was only the poor lighting and her long hair that had covered up just how bad a state she was in. A lipless grin stared back at me below sunken cheekbones and hollow eye sockets. And yet, I could tell that in another life she had been beautiful, which only made the sight all the more gut-wrenching. "My darling," she whispered, and there was something about her voice that I found hard to stay sane in the face of. I don't know why. Over a decade in that place and I'd borne witness to living nightmares. But it was this walking corpse that pushed me to my limits. The inescapable feeling of loss weighed me down, and without realizing it I found myself taking steps towards her even as my knees buckled. By the time I reached her, I was crawling until I could clutch her grimy, icy leg. And that was the last thing I remember before I woke up in my bed the following morning. Everything seemed normal, so completely mundane that I could have written the whole thing off as a bad nightmare. But there were footprints leading from my bed to the door, and later on I found the fisherman's things much as he left them. Although when I finally reeled his lines in, I found the lures gone and replaced with bits and pieces of the man who'd first set them up. I threw it all into the water below and decided it would be best to forget him. Every now and again, of course, I can't help but check my peephole at night. I never did before that, but now I do. I see her every single time. She looks sad. Hurts me to think of her out there. It ought to be terrifying, but it's more like someone's ripped out my stomach and heart and let all my insides fall out the bottom. Each time I see her, I wonder what exactly was it he did to bring her back. He leaves only one hint. A final letter, I think. It's not like he dated them. In it he says he would give everything to have her in his arms once more. Not only his life, but everything he's already lived. Every sunset, every good dream, every nightmare, every victory, every loss, every little memory that makes him who he is. He'd give it all just to save her. Sometimes I wonder about him. Figuring we'd probably be about the same age, I'd like to think back and imagine what it would have been like for the two of us to meet as young men. But for some reason, whenever I try to remember what my life was like before I came to this city, before I woke up with that coat pulled over me, well, I don't know. It's just hard. That's all. It's almost like there's nothing there. Like something reached in and took all the years away. I guess it's just one of those things I'm better off not dwelling on. I closed my Airbnb this week, but they're still finding victims. To anyone wanting to start one, I recommend getting background checks done. I know it's not ideal. In fact, it'll probably push a lot of business away. But you have no idea who might be using your property for their own malicious activities. Especially if the customer contacting you uses Airbnbs all the time and is rated extremely well. It might just be because they work very hard at being a good customer, earning positive credits and leaving good impressions so renters won't suspect anything. It all started a couple of years ago when an elderly gentleman requested the use of my cabin for the weekend. He had been a member of the app since nearly its start. Everything about his profile and message to me was very sweet. A retired lawyer traveling the country using Airbnb. He mentioned in his profile that he liked to do woodworking. During his stay, he'd build small things like birdhouses, wooden fixtures, or knick-knacks as a hobby. He even acknowledged it in his message, saying he was very clean and would remove any wood dust or shavings, but noted that if I didn't want him doing it, he would understand and just enjoy his stay at the cabin. I told him it was fine so long as he cleaned up. And he didn't disappoint, though I never heard him make anything or use tools. He stayed for the weekend and pretty much deep cleaned the entire cabin. I felt almost embarrassed. It was cleaner than any customer, or I for that matter, had ever left it. He used the cabin more than once, maybe 10 times in the last 2 years. We only spoke a few times, but he seemed nice. He was always gone before I was awake on checkout day. I'd know he'd left when his covered truck would be gone. I only heard him use a power tool on his first stay. A saw or perhaps a drill. But never again after that. I would see him carrying paint to and from the truck now and then. Slept during the day, did his hobbies at night, and he'd always leave a generous review detailing the view of the lake and the comfort of the cabin. Quiet guy, but was always a guaranteed 5-star review and free cleaning. He always mentioned how pretty the lake was. It's beautiful, Lucy, and you don't ruin it with boating or swimming? It's perfect. Instead of disrupting such a peaceful area with my sawing and drilling, I'll use my time here to paint what projects I already have done. That we could agree. The lake was special to me. It wasn't very big, not for boats at least, and the algae kept people from swimming in it. And I liked that. It was untouched by human invasion and was most naturally vibrant. I could stare at it for hours. I decided not to keep it to myself and opened this small cabin beside it as an Airbnb, so everyone could enjoy it. When people are here, I'm sure to let them know they don't have to be a stranger and can come say hi. But I'll leave them alone in case they just want a private getaway. I'll get couples on vacation or honeymoon, a single person just trying to get away from it all, and on occasion, a few 20-somethings wanting to party. It was business as usual. Until a girl staying by herself one weekend told me she heard something in the cabin. It was strange, and I don't mean to be rude, but it sounded like a shuddering noise, like a camera. I was immediately taken aback. I have no cameras or security besides locks on the door and windows. So we went down there together. We checked every inch of the small cabin and even stood in silence, waiting for the sound to happen again. No cameras shuddering or lenses flashing. But I reassured her I would never spy on people and offered a partial reimbursement for her discomfort. She seemed to believe me and apologized, unsure if she had heard anything at all. Then suddenly, at about 2 in the morning, she left. I checked the cabin in the morning, but everything seemed fine. I expected a horrible review the following week, but no review was posted. Instead, what I saw was worse. Her name in the newspaper a week later. She was reported missing. An interview with the police and her father stated that she went missing on May 7th. A week after her stay at my cabin, she called me up after leaving a cabin she rented last weekend. Said she felt like she was being watched. We talked about it. Thought maybe she might be smoking too much of the green stuff, but called me a day or so later and said she still felt like someone was watching her. At her apartment now, I told her she could come stay with us, but she said she'd be fine. Then I didn't hear from her for a while, and when I went to go check on her, the apartment was empty. The article continued to detail how the door was forced open and signs of struggle showed a clear kidnapping. My hands trembled, the newspaper in front of me. Our small town never received news like this. I set the paper down and started to brew a pot of tea, praying they would find that sweet girl. I took the steaming cup of tea down to the cabin and sat on a bench by the lake. I glared at the cabin, wondering if I should go look around. I think the article really got to me. I thought about finishing the rest of the newspaper, but I feared it would make me sick to see that headline again. I looked over the water instead, taking in the view of the small lake and surrounding forest. No one besides me knew, but when the morning sun hit the water just right, you could see right through to the bottom of the lake. A collection of beautiful reflective rocks would shine the dancing light back to the surface. It's what drew me to buy the property in the first place. It was so peaceful. Over the next dozen months, tenants came and left, but the cases of missing persons grew. I couldn't believe my eyes. Our small forest community was having a real issue. 13 people went missing from our area. I began to take matters into my own hands and messaged a collection of Airbnb renters in town. Maybe I was being a nosy neighbor with too much time on their hands, but I thought someone might have seen something. I started a conversation on Messenger with everyone, but no one had anything to report. The last people to use my cabin were a group of college kids spending the weekend partying. They were a bit loud, playing music I didn't understand and shouting all sorts of things. But I gave no complaint. Sometimes a quiet place needs a bit of excitement to better appreciate its normally peaceful setting. I woke the next morning and sat on my porch, steam rolling off a cup of tea cusped in my hands. The cabin was quiet and a couple of tents were pitched outside. A few loose red cups lay scattered by the fire pit. The sun was just beginning to rise over the trees. Chelsea. I jumped in my seat, spilling hot tea on my lap. One of the boys walked out of the forest, visibly disheveled and panicking. I stood, wiping off my pants, and called out to him. "Hey, everything okay? I run the Airbnb here. You kids all right?" No, we can't find her." My heart sunk. A chilling tone escaped his exhausted breath. He must have been looking in the woods for several minutes, if not hours. Another guy stepped out from the brush opposite, farther down the driveway. "Anything, Matt?" "No, man. We should call the police or something. It's been way too long." I rushed into the house and grabbed my phone. Dialing 911, I walked back onto the porch and was promptly greeted by the two young men. "Hey, where is she? We've heard people have gone missing here. Is she inside?" I shook my head, startled, and stood aside, letting the frustrated young man into my home. The operator answered and I told her my address and what had happened. From inside I could hear things being moved around. Between shouts for Chelsea, the other kid on my porch apologized for his friend's behavior. From the cabin walked up a girl, holding a phone to her ear. "Jake, I'm calling the police. It's been like 3 hours and I'm getting super worried." Her voice quivered. Jake gestured to the girl to come up to the porch and pointed at me. "She's already calling the police. Let's just calm Matt down. He's starting to freak out." After speaking to the operator, I hung up the phone and asked the kids to come inside and tell me what had happened. We stepped in and the angrier one, Matt, saw his friends and relaxed a bit. I put on some tea, and they explained they heard some noises from Chelsea's tent at around 2 or 3 in the morning. They assumed she had gotten up to grab something from the car or use the restroom inside the cabin. But when she never returned, they checked the tent. It was left open and things didn't look right. It was a mess. All the blankets were tossed, and things were scattered. The two sleeping in the cabin said they never heard her come in. The cops arrived and the kids talked them through everything. It was then that I learned that Matt's cousin had been added to the missing list a few months ago. A girl on the other side of town, taken right from her campus dorm. His friends told him everything would be okay, that this camping trip would be good for him. I helped the best I could, but I didn't know what else to do. Officers walked the perimeter of my land, checking every tree, hole, and hill. An officer dressed in waders walked into the lake, skimming the surface and under algae for any sign of Chelsea. When the police asked for security footage, I told them I don't have any cameras on the premises. I've never had to before. Our community wasn't like that. You're right, it wasn't, but it is now, the officer said. Once the news got out, and the rather unflattering review from the kids was posted, my cabin became quite unappealing. I looked back at the group chat that night with the other Airbnb owners and they were all abuzz. It was like they forgot I was the one who started the group chat in the first place. I can't believe it. If that were my place, it'd be finished. Do you think she did it? The owner? OMG. Could you imagine? Do you think she did it? Really? I was mortified. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I quickly typed a message. "Hey, guys, Lucy here. I can't believe what happened either. I'm still in shock myself and I hope they find that girl." Post. The thread went silent. I could see chat bubbles begin typing, then stop. One by one the profile bubbles dropped down, showing that people had seen my comment. But no one said anything. Overwhelmed, I put the phone down and cried. I couldn't imagine how people might think I'd do something like that. It took nearly the whole night to calm myself down. I had to remember that I never met those other owners before. And they don't know me either. It's just a scary news headline. A worried community. And the fact that I started the group chat. And that girl was taken here. At my cabin. I didn't look at my phone for the rest of the night. I had a cup of tea and went to bed. A couple of weeks went by and not one person was interested in renting the cabin. I couldn't blame them. Who would want to stay at a cabin where someone went missing? Except the old man. I didn't ask him if he heard what happened. I just left him alone to tend to his hobbies. Until night, when I was woken by his truck. The sound of an engine revving sprang me out of sleep, and when I looked out the window, I saw he had gotten stuck trying to go around the lake. I was so confused, and kind of upset. I ran outside and yelled at him, a bit assertively, what he thought was doing driving all over the mud and grass. He slammed the gas, forcing his truck out of the dirt, and drove toward the house, stopping at the driveway. I stormed up to his truck but stepped back when he shouted from his window, "Mind your own business, ya old bag, before I make you take a dunk in the lake." He peeled off and raced down the driveway. A nearly 6-foot stitched bag used for collecting wood dust flew from the flailing rear of the truck. I watched as he left, then quickly went inside. I told the police what had happened, but since he didn't damage anything or hurt anyone, they focused their attention on the missing people. They asked if I wanted a squad car sent out, but they were right. I'd rather have them trying to find those poor girls. I checked the cabin. It seemed fine, besides tire tracks all over the yard. So I went back inside and tried to relax. But my thoughts spiraled. Anxiety took the best of me, and I paced around the house. I needed to calm down. So I walked down to the lake. Sitting on the bench, without a cup of tea, I watched the sunrise. I knew these woods inside and out. I grew up in this area all my life. I hated whoever was doing this to our community. To my community. To my land, lake, and my cabin. The cabin and lake that I wasn't ready to say. I don't feel safe in anymore. I tucked my head into my hands and cried. It was true. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't feel safe. I walked back to the house, defeated, picking up the phone. My mind wandered trying to think of the name of the realtor who sold me the house, when I noticed the group chat had blown up. Someone else went missing, and at an Airbnb in town. The owner, Michelle, explained that a couple was staying, and on the second night, someone broke in. The husband was murdered, and the wife was taken. But police had a lead this time. After checking the small rental, they found something in the bedroom. I never noticed it before, so I pointed it out to the cops, and they just cracked it open. Inside a wooden bookend placed on a shelf in the living room was a small camera and mic. The only reason they found it was because the owner didn't recognize the decorative piece. The cops asked her for a list of past tenants, and since she was a new renter of about 5 months, she only had 13 visits. But one guy stood out. An elderly gentleman who liked to do woodworking. He said he just makes random things while staying, so I didn't think anything of it when I heard him working on something. Everyone started to comment. I had a guy like that. He was quiet and very nice. Yeah, retired lawyer, right? He cleaned the whole place for like 3 hours before he left. It was weird. Retired. Yeah, but he said he was a doctor, not a lawyer. Guys, I don't remember putting this up in my rental. After so many comments and connecting stories, someone posted a picture, a birdhouse on a tree, facing the bedroom window of their rental. Countless comments rolled in pleading them to either call the police or just open the birdhouse. The owner posted another picture, and all the chat bubbles stopped. No one commented anything, and we all stared at our phones in disbelief. A camera. Inside the birdhouse. Not obvious either, but planted in a hidden compartment in the bottom. So birds could still nest. Disguising it better. A cold feeling rushed over me, as I'm sure it did with everyone in the thread. I broke the silence, demanding everyone's urgency. Listen up. Everyone go and check your properties. Right now. Light fixtures, ornaments, pictures, and anything wooden. If you see something out of place, bring it to the police station. I'll meet everyone there in an hour. All the chat bubbles dropped to my comment, and I slammed my phone on the coffee table. I ran out to my property and began tearing it apart. I couldn't find anything, and I even broke multiple furnishings in the process. I was confident I had bought everything in there, but just to be sure I broke all of it. An hour passed and I decided to head to the police station. I walked past a small gathering of people holding knick-knacks, clocks, and just small cameras in general. Everyone had been bugged. The police connected every Airbnb owner, the elderly man. We all had him as a tenant. Every single Airbnb owner in our small community had been visited by this man. None of us could believe it. We exchanged looks, information, and greetings. We all felt connected by this occurrence, and our group chat was a bonding of support. I told them how I never found anything, and so a few came by to help me look. But still, we found nothing. The police informed us later that the old man was using a fake name. They never found any information on him or his whereabouts. He must travel the country doing this kind of stuff. He would listen in on people, on girls he liked, and if they mentioned their address or when they would be alone while talking to someone on the phone or something, he'd make note of it. Then, he'd stop by while they were sleeping and take them. The police said he got so confident, or crazy, that he started showing up even when other people were around. Like he did with my cabin or Michelle's, where he murdered someone. The police told us they would put out a nationwide search for the man, and any name he used. As for our Airbnb community, it was done for. No one wanted to stay in a town where a bunch of people went missing. But all became friends and continued conversation on the group chat. The only thing we couldn't understand is why he never left something at my place, or why he only visited my cabin multiple times. It's been a couple of months since then. As for the cabin, I took it off Airbnb, then tore it down. I wanted to inspect every inch for some sort of listening device but found nothing. Nothing struck me as weird until I started taking down the cabin's structure. There was a gap in the walls between the bathroom and the bedroom. It was large enough that a person could fit but was used for maintaining pipes and wires running throughout the cabin. What was strange about it was a 3-foot-tall cutout on the outside of the cabin leading into the maintenance gap. You wouldn't know unless you push on exactly the right spot, as it was cut with precision and hidden on purpose. Someone had been in there, making it accessible to come and go as they please. A small box for sitting, particles of food littering the floor, and a thin hand saw set on a wooden joint. He must have used this to make the hole, carefully and quietly, so as not to raise suspicion. And on either side of the walls were makeshift peepholes that would discreetly open into the bathroom or living room, just large enough for an eye or a camera. I had an officer come out to see the hidden compartment and add it to the case file. I also updated the group chat with pictures so people could look out for the same thing. Then I tore down the remainder of the cabin. Once the last board dropped, I moved the bench to the other side of the lake so I could take in a different view. It wasn't much, but it helped me forget what happened here. Even if for a moment, I wasn't going to let this ruin my lake, my home. The beauty and calmness of this body of water would never be tarnished. So, I walked a little further with my cup of hot tea and sat beside the lake. I waited patiently as the sun rose over the lush trees. A blanket draped over my cold shoulders. I felt the warmth of the sun kiss my face and was reassured that the lake would make me smile once again. The sun washed over the water's surface and the bottom of the lake unveiled itself. Dozens of beautiful rocks glistened a rainbow of lights at me, and multiple bags, of a similar color to the rocks, obstructed the vibrant colors. The fabric of the bags were crudely painted to blend in with the rocks, making them hardly noticeable from this side of the lake. When the light hit just right, you couldn't miss them. My tea grew cold as I stared for what felt like hours at my beautiful lake, filled with the bodies of missing people from our community. My therapist said this would help. What happened at summer camp? 1977. I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm sitting at my computer. midnight. My fingers pecking out these terrible words on the keyboard. But insomnia is a bitch and my therapist says this is a very healthy exercise. All I want is to get some sleep. He says that the words need to come out. They're clogging up my insides like sludge in ancient plumbing beneath a crumbling house. Words can be poison, he says. Thoughts can be poison. It's like draining a wound, he says. But don't you have to drain a wound over and over until it's healed? I don't think I can do this more than once. When I was 8, I went to summer camp. On the first night, 3 girls were raped, murdered, and left for the counselors to find the next morning. I've heard it all. The different diagnoses given by every doctor from one coast to the other. Survivor's guilt. PTSD. Schizophrenia in some rare cases. The problem isn't in what I saw. It's in what I didn't say. Shit, I'm jumping around too much. Let me start over. 3 girls, raped and murdered while the camp counselors slept just yards away. Piled like dirty laundry on the trail with the silly name because whoever left them there knew someone would be along sooner or later to take a shower. 3 little girls in their sleeping bags. Excited for the start of summer camp. Just as excited as I was, hell, I may as well have been one of those little girls in tent number 7. They call it tent number 8, but that's stupid because we all know no one counted the counselor's tent. I was in tent number 6 with 3 other girls. Or tent number 7, if you read the reports. Whatever. Does the number matter? Maybe it did. Oh God. I get this cold metal taste at the back of my throat when I think about how much it really might have mattered. We were all in the same group. The Kiowa group. Our tents in a tight little cluster. It made it easy for him, I guess. Tiny little tents with tiny little girls inside. I'm off track again. I can't think. My hands are shaking and I have to keep hitting the delete key. Start over. June 1977. Tent number 6. That's where I was, until I heard the noise outside. I woke with a start, clutching the stuffed animal I had tried so hard to hide from the older girls because they had laughed and said toys were for babies. Mr. Beans wasn't for babies. He was a friend. But I didn't have many friends that weren't stuffed animals, so I kept him hidden in case the older girls came back. And maybe they had, was what I thought. The rustling sounds outside the tent sounded like someone was there. And my first thought was the older girls from the Arapaho group. Girls who were allowed to wear lip gloss and talked about boys and just seemed so cool. Like the ladies on the covers of magazines. They had teased me earlier at dinner that night, especially about Mr. Beans. But for one terrible hopeful moment I thought maybe they were testing me. To see if I was tough enough to be their friend. To prove I wasn't a baby. Mama said sometimes that people teased because they liked you. I wanted them to like me. I didn't wake up the other girls. Because I knew they would ruin the whole thing. They would probably cry and be babies, and then the older girls from Arapaho wouldn't be my friends. I even put Mr. Beans behind my suitcase so they wouldn't see him. I waited but nothing happened. More rustles. That was all. The tent flap opened. I looked for the faces of my new friends, but it was a man. Not any of the counselors. Someone I'd never seen before. This realization set in like a heavy stone sinking to the bottom of a black pond. I can't do this, I can't do this. I have to finish. I have to drain the wound. His eyes scanned the tent. His eyes counted 1, 2, 3, 4 little girls. His eyes stopped on me. The 4th little girl. And his eyes met mine. He smiled. It was not a very nice smile. He put one finger up to his lips, pursed them, and said, "Shush." I nodded, because he was a grown-up, and Mama taught me to listen to grown-ups. He ducked out and closed the tent flap again. It was late at night, or early in the morning. I'm not sure which, but it was so dark and it seemed like such a long time to lay there awake before I heard someone moaning in the distance. It was quiet but not that far away. I'm told that other girls heard it too, but from 4 different areas of the camp at once. Some girls made up stories afterwards to get attention, but not me. I never told anyone, not until now. When the light finally started to break, I realized how badly I needed to pee. I wasn't sure if the man was still outside, but it was probably okay because it was morning and the sun was coming up over the horizon and bad things didn't happen to little girls in the sunshine. So I poked my head out of the tent, looked around. The sky was that pale white-blue color it turns just at dawn, but it still felt safe. Somehow better because the sun had risen and everything was okay. I headed down the trail with the funny name, towards the showers and the toilets. And that's where I saw them. At the base of a tree, slumped together like strange piles of garbage, were 3 little girls. I knew their names. I still know their names, but that doesn't matter now. Does it? 2 of them were in their sleeping bags. One was just on the ground. She had her pajama top pushed up. No pajama bottoms. A strange red flashlight near their feet. There was blood. They weren't moving. I can see them, I can still see them, I can still see them. This doesn't feel like draining the wound so much as infecting it. I don't know why, but I went right past them. I guess I knew if I went back to my tent I'd wet the bed and I'd never have any big girl friends, so I went right past the little sleeping bags and straight to the bathroom. I peed. I went back to tent number 6. Tent number 7 was empty. When I went back to sleep, the last sleep I ever had unbroken by nightmares or screaming, I think I had convinced myself the whole thing was a bad dream. There was no man, no pile of sleeping bags with dead little girls in them. No empty tent number 7. The counselors got us up earlier than usual. We went to the Great Hall for breakfast. We went canoeing in the river. It was fun. Everything was okay. Bad dream. That was all. Buses came to take us back to the Great Hall. When we got off the buses, one of the older counselors, the ones that ran the camp, he told us there was a problem with the water supply. Camp was canceled for the summer. We all needed to pack our things and go home. Water supply. Camp canceled. In tent number 6, the other girls whined about how it was unfair. They'd sold so many cookies to get here this year, and after one stupid day it was already over. But I kept hearing the gray-faced counselor's words in my ears. Camp is canceled. Camp is canceled. I tried to nap on the bus ride home, but my seatmate kept waking me up because I was crying in my sleep. She called me a baby. Bus stopped. Got off the bus. Troop leader said not to talk to anyone who wasn't our parents. Lots of reporters. Shouting. Mama grabbed me and cried. No more camp, she said. She threw out my sleeping bag as soon as we got home. The police came once or twice after that, but I never talked to them. Mama told them I'd been very clear. I hadn't seen anything. I'd slept all night. I'd slept all night. I haven't slept a full night since. Would it have helped if I said something? If I had told? Every time I thought about doing it, my heart plummeted into my stomach. I saw the man's face and his finger on his lips and heard his shush. Usually I threw up. So these words, the words I've never said until now, they festered inside me like some exotic form of mental rot. I can't hold a job for more than a few months. I call in sick too much. No husband to speak of. The night terrors took care of that. A man will only sleep in your bed so many times before the screaming and thrashing drives him away. But my new therapist, he's been so nice. He tells me whatever happened isn't my fault and that this will help, and I started to think that maybe it was time to tell. Time to describe the face that poked into tent number 6 that night in 1977. And then I remember why I can't. What I had blocked out. The thing my mind forced me to forget, even though I can still see the twisted, tangled little bodies underneath the tree as clear as day. My brain shattered this memory and scattered it to the wind, but it has always been there, waiting at the bottom of my gullet to force out vomit instead of words should I ever decide to tell. Mr. Beans was gone. When I went to pack my bag, Mr. Beans was gone. And in his place, a little scrap of paper, much like the one the counselors had found back in April and discarded as a joke. The note that mentioned killing 3 girls. 3 girls, not 4. Tent number 7, not 6. But my note, oh yes, my note, all it said was, shush. We don't sleep.